Hello, everyone, and welcome to Friends Life Care's Financial Symposium and our current session, which is titled, What to Look For When Hiring a Professional. My name is Joe Connor, and I am Friends Life Care's Chief Financial and Administrative Officer, and I will be the moderator for the next few days. Before we get started, just want to go over a few housekeeping items to ensure that you can fully participate in today's webinar. You will have the opportunity to submit questions and comments at any time during the presentations by typing them into the Q&A box. The presenter will answer all questions given time, and we'll be either interrupting the presenter or we will be waiting till the end of the webinar to ask the questions. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Steve Blum has been advising clients on financial matters for more than 35 years. He has been a member of affiliated faculty of the Wharton School of Business at University of Pennsylvania since 1994 and has won Wharton's William G. Whitney Award for Outstanding Teaching numerous times. He is a frequent and popular presenter for various schools, corporations, and professional associations. Steve, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Joe, for that kind introduction. Well, good afternoon, everybody. So we're going to talk today about professionals, professionalism, and how to deal. Let me start by telling a brief story about myself. Very, very long time ago, I was not too long out of law school, and I found being a lawyer to be less than satisfying. I was very unhappy as a young lawyer. And friends asked, why are you unhappy? And I felt like I wasn't really helping. And what to do? I spent several years trying to figure that out. And eventually one friend kind of aggressively said to me, wait a minute, you know, investing, money, taxes, charitable giving, estate planning, you know what people really need help with. Why don't you just put up a shingle and say, I help people? And eventually that's what I did. Since I had a law degree, I called myself Steven G. Blum, attorney at law. And but really my practice at that early stage was just helping people. Over the years, and part of the way I was helping people was with financial advice of all sorts. Over the years, I got one partner, and now I have two professional partners. And because one partner was not a lawyer, it became necessary to open a firm that is a registered investment advisor company. That's part of what I do, what we do together. But as a result of that, all at the same time, I was teaching at Wharton. And so over time, with a professor's eye, I began to look deeper and deeper into the financial services industry. And that led me to a series of questions about who are we trusting and why, and what are the problems with trusting of practitioners? Started with financial services practitioners, and then grew to a broader question of what is this, how to think about this issue about people we have to trust, or we're put in a position where we jolly well are going to trust them. What do we do about the problems with that? And so that's what today's talk is going to be about. I didn't, when I agreed to do or was delighted to be asked to do this talk, I didn't originally think it was going to be focused on the financial services industry. The point of this talk is to be a little broader than that and to think about professionals generally. However, it seems like the topic of the day is financial services. And so time allowing, at the end, we'll swing back to that more specific category. So let's start with this. There are three historical professions. They are medicine, law, and the clergy. And if we go back hundreds of years and we look at the phrase a professional or the professions, that's what we're talking about. So let's start by talking a little bit about you and your doctor. You and a person who is clearly a professional in your life. So I'm going to start with a story. I have a few stories for you today, and they're all apocryphal. None of them are really exactly true, but they're not entirely made up either. They are borrowed from real facts. Here's a story about going to the doctor because you have pain in your side, and the doctor says, I don't like the looks of this. I'm going to send you to a surgeon. I'm going to refer you to a surgeon, and you go to see the surgeon, and she examines you, and she turns to you and says, you have gallbladder disease. And for one brief instant, in her head, this conversation takes place. If I did surgery on you, I would make a great deal more money than if I just see you in the office. But I'm a professional, forget the money. But I have 3 residents and a fellow who need to practice gallbladder surgery. I could get a practice in for 2 of them if I did surgery on you. Furthermore, the folks who run the operating room division have really been on my back, and I could really buy about a month of their not pestering me if I did surgery on you. That all took less than a second, and then she smiles at you and says, but of course, we're going to try medicine first. Surgery is only our last resort because surgery is more dangerous, and that's what's best for you. So, what do you expect from your doctor, this professional in your life? You expect knowledge and skill, definitely. But you also expect caring. You expect her or him to always make decisions in the direction of what is best for you, and to block out this idea of what is best for her, or what is best for the health system, or what is best for the department chair of surgery or medicine, or whatever it is. What is best for you is what you expect to win the day. And one more thing, I said you expect your doctor to be caring, but you also expect her to be a safeguarder of your well-being. In sum, you expect her to use her special knowledge and skills, not just for your benefit, but solely for your benefit. Tell you another story to load up some things I'm going to say later, another doctor story. So you go to, you have a terrible itch and you go to the dermatologist, and he examines your skin and the itchy parts and the rash, and he says, okay, I have a pretty good idea what this is. And now, again, there's the one split second. This one's a little more of a fiction. But it turns out that this doctor in an imaginary world is sponsored by one of the big drug companies. He won't tell you this, but he works closely with and is well taken care of by a big drug company, and we'll call it, well, we don't have to call it anything. We'll just call it Drug Company X. He's a Drug Company X doctor. And he knows that the medicine that is absolutely best for your particular dermatological problem is made by Drug Company Y. So, but Drug Company X makes a pretty good product. It's almost as good. it will more or less deal with your problem. And what you expect, of course, is that he's going to treat you with the best possible medicine, the one from company Y. But if we were in an alternative world where he was allowed to, well, it was all out front. You know, he had a big company X sign in his window and he said, well, I'm a company X advisor, I mean doctor. And he said, no, I'm going to treat you with the drug from company X. There is a better drug from company Y, or maybe he doesn't say that. He certainly has an incentive not to say that. But he says, I'm going to treat you with a drug from company X. There's a slightly better one from company Y. What would you think of this doctor and this medical system that was letting him practice this way? And of course, the answer is you haven't thought about it much because our medical system simply doesn't allow that. Our medical, not just system, but our medical profession would not permit that, does not permit that. We don't have to deal with that. That's good. Okay. So, and that's going to come in later in our conversation. That's an analogy about some other industries. But so we talked a minute ago about what you expect from your doctor. We talked about skill and caring, skill and knowledge and caring and caretaking, and using the skills only and solely for your benefit, the patient's benefit. How does society go about, or how can we be confident that we're going to get this? I like to point out when I talk about doctors, you literally sit naked before your doctor, or perhaps lie completely naked in your doctor's presence. It is both literally and a fabulous metaphor for we are totally reliant on them to do the right thing by us. And if they don't, there is damn well near nothing we can do about it. Let me briefly note that we expect something very, very similar from our lawyers. So I've been a lawyer for a long, long time, and I've been thinking about lawyering for a long, long time. And I've come to think of a metaphor of lawyering being that as a lawyer, I sit behind a great big desk, and clients come in and they're holding a cloth sack. They put that cloth sack down on the desk. And I say, or at least I wonder, what's in the cloth sack? And the answer is, all that is most dear to me in the world. That's the client's answer. That's what's in the cloth sack. All that is most dear to the client in the world. And the client looks at the lawyer and essentially says, take great care of what's in this sack. And for heaven's sake, don't use what is in this sack against me or take advantage of the fact that I have put this sack in your hands. You take this sack, but you don't in any way take advantage or use it for your own benefit, only to do what I need and what is right for me. I would point out that when you, those of us who do, go to our clergy person and we close the door at their office, or maybe Catholic people actually go into the confessional, but either way, confessional or an office, and we close the door, we hold similar expectations, right? It is the highest level of trust, and it is also the highest level of our vulnerability as patients, as clients, as parishioners. So here's the question that we're next going to address. What does society do to uphold this and to make it the most likely that those practitioners, the lawyers, the doctors, the clergy, men and women, will uphold this level of trust that we place in them? And here's the answers. Here are some of the answers that I've come up with. Society has made sure that our true professionals, the members of the traditional learned professions, they are trained to a tremendous degree. and they are socialized as well to an equal degree. They spend years and years in school. Among that, their training is training in ethics. And furthermore, those professionals are also, in their years of schooling and training, they are deeply socialized in the idea of being caretakers and being safeguarders. Being safeguarders of their patients, and some other things too, including the reputation of their profession. Furthermore, those professions punish those who stray, and society and the professions reward those who live up to those high standards. Professionals tend to, now there's a social contract here, and I'm fond of saying it's starting to fray at the edges a little bit. But the contract, the original social contract that I think is still pretty much in existence, is professionals get very good lives and they are deeply respected. They live in the top of the hill, they get to eat the center of the meat, and in exchange, they live up to these very, very high standards. Now, I gave this lecture once to a group of students in Greece, and a hand shot up, and one of my Greek students said, "Oh, so professor, you are saying that professionals are altruistic, or they need to be altruistic?" Not at all, not at all. Professionals are well paid, and they get a good life. It's a good deal for them, as well as for society and for the individual patients. A good deal all around. They're not altruistic at all. But because I teach at Wharton, this often comes up. As you may see later, I've come to the conclusion that it is impossible to be a true professional and to become extremely wealthy. Now, some of you may realize that the phrase extremely wealthy in our society now, in the year 2021, is at a level that is insane. If you're going to be a true professional, that can't be reached. But they can do very well and be rewarded and live extremely good lives. So it's not altruistic. Rather, it's being a professional. So let me tell you another story about me. Very, very long time ago, I can almost hardly remember it. When I was in graduate school, I was involved in a project, and the project started out being about how to train professionals, but it slowly morphed. I had a very famous Harvard professor named Israel Scheffler, and I realized as I worked on the project that I didn't really understand what a definition of professional was. I wasn't sure what we were talking about. And so I kind of morphed and changed my own piece of the project, and Professor Scheffler was good with it. My project ended up being, what is a professional and what does society ask of its professionals? And you kind of just discussed that. And I ended up creating my own definition of what is a true professional. And you may have seen this in the handout. I should talk about the handouts in a few minutes. But I came to an understanding for myself that a definition of a true professional is, the true professional is that practitioner, that professional person who, when her interests and the interests of the clients diverge, go separate ways, and that in professional practice, that is a daily occurrence. The true professional is the one who follows the client's interest and only the client's interest. That became my definition, and I think it's a useful one. Now, I want to stop and say This is aspirational. I am most definitely not saying to you that you can always expect this from a doctor or a lawyer or a clergy person. You're not necessarily going to get it. But it is what the professions ask and demand of their practitioners. And I would say this, when we don't get it, the practitioner, the so-called professional, has let their profession down. They have fallen down on the job. My argument is, it is what society is asking of its profession. Okay, so let me pause there and say, any questions so far about what I've said? So I'm going to shift gears a tiny little bit now.
Steve, there are no questions in the chat box right now.
Okay, fine. I'll keep going then. So the next heading on my notes is, well, I put it a little cheekily in my notes, is the problem of not professionals. So our society has gotten into the habit of using the word professional to mean someone who is highly skilled at something, or someone who does something very often. You do it a lot, then we call you a professional. As you can see from what I've said so far, that is a far cry from the definition that I'm advocating here. And I'm going to say further, I think as a society, it's going to get us into trouble. And I guess I'm arguing that as an individual who uses services of professionals and other practitioners, it may get you into trouble. We have no reason to expect the attributes of what I'm calling a true professional, with my very high standards I've set for them, from the numerous practitioners we deal with in our lives. They do not have years and years of training. They do not have socializations, professional socializations from their professions that are trying to mold and shift them into people who are caregivers and safeguarders. Reminds me to say, all through law school, constantly they said, we're training you, among other things, to think like a lawyer. And I know that medical training is endlessly getting people to think like, be like, act like a doctor. And I know less about the training of clergy. I should probably note here, since I'm talking so much about clergy, we're not talking about clergy people who get their who get a certificate by mail order. We're talking about people who go to seminary and spend years and years and years training to be a priest, a minister, a rabbi, an imam. Okay. So we have people all over our lives who we are loosely calling professionals, who have none of this social training, socialization, and I talked earlier about professional rewarding and professional punishment. They're not really subject to as much of that. Here I have in my notes is in the nature of warning. Note in particular, folks who call themselves professionals, but whose really job is more of a salesman. Folks who, even though they loosely call themselves a professional, they're really trying to sell you something. This could potentially bring us to the financial services industry. But first, let's review the problems we face generally, not just in the financial services industry, but in any dealing with folks who we have to rely on, folks who are presenting themselves to us with the word professional. I am a professional. And here, I know that the handout that is available to you for this session involved 4 chapters from my book, My book is called, I'm going to hold it up, see how that goes. My book is called Negotiating Your Investments. It deals with a number of these matters. It deals with both negotiating and investing. But the 4 chapters I gave you deal with these 4 problems of what do we do about who we should be trusting and who we shouldn't be. Since I'm talking about the book, let me just say a kind of a funny indirect plug for it. So this book was not commercially successful, as a book written by a professional should never be. That's a joke. I had wished it would be commercially successful, but it was not. It didn't sell enough copies to satisfy the publisher, who was Wiley. Because Wiley wasn't making money off it, they were very happy to let me buy back the rights. So Wiley no longer owns the book. I own the book. And so if you're interested in this book, contact my office. And rather than going out and trying to buy it in the open market, because you'll get gouged in the open market. And if you contact my office, we'll give you one for free. Okay. So the 4 chapters, back to what we're supposed to be talking about. And those 4 chapters are entitled, for those of you who didn't get to see them, The Problem of Conflict of Interest, The Problem of Asymmetric Information, Whom Can You Trust and Why, and professionalism. Who is a true professional and why? And now I'm going to talk about the subject briefly, about the subjects of each of those chapters. So we start by talking about conflicts of interest. So we are going to be bedeviled by the problem of conflicts of interest with all kinds of people who we deal with in life, who are professionals or practitioners or salesmen or anybody who we're interacting with in a commercial way. Are they going to do what is best for us or what is best for them? And I realize I'm telling you something that you know deeply from living your lives. You have an intuitive sense of who to trust and who to not trust. I may challenge the who to trust part, but the who to not trust part, you know that full well. Not one of you has ever gone to a car dealership and said, well, I'm just going to trust them blindly and completely because they have a reputation, right? But I put it to you that what really lies behind that reputation they have is that they suffer from very severe conflicts of interest. If you buy what they're selling, it's better for you. It's better for them. They have an incentive structure. Furthermore, if they're selling a number of different products, it's in most cases better for them if you buy the more expensive one. But it turns out that if you study conflicts of interest, what you find is that there are a lot of them, and you can dig very deep in thinking about conflicts of interest. So first, I'm going to talk about some obvious ones. So an obvious conflict of interest is sales commissions. Anytime you are dealing with somebody who, if you do what they're asking you to do, if you buy the product, if you take on the service, whatever, they make money. And if you don't, they don't make money. They have an obvious conflict of interest because they have a tremendous incentive to get you to do it. Now, I'll add that this is not just commissions, which may be obvious, we may know, or we may suspect that somebody is working on commission. There's a vast labyrinth of other kinds of payments. And for short, we're just going to call them kickbacks. They go by 100 names. Lots of conflicts of interest where if you go to the left, they make less money. And if you go to the right, they make more money. And they're always going to have a strong incentive to try to get you to go to the right. But now, let's talk about some other less obvious conflicts of interest that come up. And this is to try and make my argument that conflicts of interest are everywhere, and you want to be watching for them all over the commercial part of your life, the outside your home part of your life. I'd wink at you here and say, gee, I wonder if there are any conflicts of interest even within your home or within your family life. I'll bet there might be. So, an obvious conflict of interest is time. Time spent helping you or dealing with your problem is time not spent with somebody else or meeting one of my other needs as a practitioner or getting new clients or whatever the case may be. Nobody has excess time. So there is a conflict of interest between spending the time that you need the professional to spend and their interest in spending as little time with you as possible to get the job done. Here's one that people seldom think of, but fame or renown. Maybe it may not be compatible with doing what's best for you, my client, for me to build my reputation or my public awareness. I don't know why, but our newest expert on everything in America, Anthony Scaramucci, pops into my mind. Furthering their own career. It's just not always compatible with what is best for the client. So I'll tell you a couple stories. Oh yeah, I'm going to tell you a couple stories. The first one is at Wharton, over the years, I have long taught a case that is about realtors, real estate agents. And in that case, the case has four roles: a buyer of a house and her agent, the seller of a house and his agent. And as students do the case, they suddenly realize that if they are the seller of the house, that they would like to get the highest price possible for the house they're selling. And their agent, who's probably going to get 3% of the price, would like to get the highest amount he can for being the agent. So their interests are nicely aligned, and that's great. Let's go forward. And the buyer of the house starts to do the case and realizes that he would like to get the lowest possible price. He would like to buy it for the lowest price possible. And his agent, who gets a commission based on the price of the sale, would like, oops, potentially the highest price. The higher the price that sells for, the higher the commission for the buyer's agent, which seemed to me an obvious conflict of interest. And it is an obvious conflict of interest. However, after I taught this case for a number of years, I read the book Freakonomics. And the book Freakonomics actually takes up this very problem of the interests of real estate agents. But the way they studied it was to look at the difference between how long a house stayed on the market when a real estate agent represented a customer, as opposed to how long it stayed on the market hoping for a better price when the real estate agent herself owned the home. And what they found was, if the real estate agent owns the home, it stays on the market a lot longer. They hold out for price, because it turns out that a real estate agent's biggest interest is probably not in getting a slightly higher price for the sale to get a slightly higher commission. Turns out that what a real estate agent's underlying interest probably is get this sale done. so I can get it out of my inbox and into my finished box and move on to the next one. So when you're working with an agent and an offer is made and you turn to the agent and say, is that a good offer? Should I take it or should I hold off? Your agent has a whole set of interests that are probably at least partially in conflict with your own. Okay, an interesting and good story. Here's another story, and this one is about fame, renown, and reputation. There is a lawyer in Los Angeles who is very famous, and you've probably seen her on TV and heard of her, who tends to represent people, women, but particularly movie stars, young movie stars, who have been sexually abused, particularly by directors on the so-called casting couch, whatever. Let's imagine a young woman coming to this lawyer, going into the office, closing the door, and it's a very young actress, and she's very shaken by what has happened to her, and she's crying, and she says, "What should I do?" Well, let's just imagine. I'm not sure this is always true, but let's just imagine that the deepest truth is that the best thing for this movie star is to secretly and quietly settle this matter, perhaps get some money and it'll help pay for counseling, whatever. But this particular movie star does not want to be dragged through the public mud. And she looks at this lawyer who just lives to be in the public eye. And there's a pretty sharp conflict of interest, because what the lawyer wants to do is hold a press conference tomorrow. And is that best for her young client? Well, something to think about. Okay. Couple more things from my notes. One is, in general, when thinking about conflicts of interest, keep a sharp eye on the profit motive. Everybody you deal with has to make a living, but that means a lot of different things in a lot of different situations, and you want to keep a sharp eye on how practitioners are addressing that. All right, here is the worst, well, maybe not the very worst, but a deeply troubling conflict of interest that you might not think about. And here I'm briefly going to pick on the financial services industry because it's the one I know best. Imagine that you have gone to a financial advisor, and this financial advisor works with one of those big companies, and I don't know which big company it is, so we're going to make up a name. We're going to call it General Goldman Merrill, the General Goldman Merrill Company. And this is an individual advisor, and she or he is very nice. It's a she, I guess, and she's very charming, and you like her a lot, and she assures you that she's going to take tremendously good care of you financially. And furthermore, not only she, but her entire company, General Goldman Merrill Company, is scouring the world to find the very best investments for you. Okay, that's great. And she does some investing for you. And one day the phone rings and it's her, your beloved stockbroker / financial advisor. And she says, listen, the company, the big shots in the company say that the thing to buy is XYZ company. And I want you to buy a couple of shares of it. Okay? All right. You say, well, you sure? Oh, I hear incredible things about XYZ company. You need to own some. Okay, you say to her, go ahead and buy some shares from me. All right. Who are you buying the shares from? Well, we tend to think that that we're going into an open market, the New York Stock Exchange, if you will, and buying shares from some other investor, some investor who foolishly has decided to sell XYZ shares at the very moment when we're being told they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. But careful now, because the big company, like General Goldman Merrill, they are also investment banks. They create new stock and they hold inventories of stock. And it is entirely possible that you are buying your shares from the General Goldman Merrill company itself, that they are on the other side of this transaction. So I'm going to generalize this by saying a deep conflict of interest is when the people who are supposed to be serving you, the so-called professionals, are actually your competitors in some way. They're actually involved in the same thing you're involved with and competing with you around. So conflicts of interest is a big problem to think about. Here's the second big problem. I'll try to go a little faster as I keep an eye on time. This one is called asymmetric information, and that is a really fancy economist's way of saying they know more than you. That's what asymmetric information means. They have more information and you have less. They know more about the industry. They know more about the players. They understand the jargon, which you don't, and the standards and the practices of the industry and its dirty little secrets and so on. Sometimes they even know more about us than we do in certain ways. That one's a little tricky. But I'm going to tell you a quick story. Back to Greece, to when I used to teach there, and back to that very same case that I was telling you about that I had the Greek students doing. And let's just say that in the case, the buyer is willing to pay up to $500,000 for the house, and the seller would be willing to take as little as $400,000. Right? And here we get this professional problem and the conflicts of interest and so on. But when we finished the case and we all turned our cards over, so to speak, we were all discussing it openly and all the facts came out and all the secrets came out. One of the older Greek students, and these were not kids, these were professionals coming at night, just burst out laughing as we talked about the ethics of the case. And he said, Professor, you're teaching this like an American. In Greece, here is what would happen. The broker, one of the two brokers, probably broker for the seller, would realize that seller is willing to sell for $400,000 and that but the buyer is willing to pay $500,000. And broker would buy it himself at $400,000 from his client and turn around and sell it to buyer for $500,000. I hope I didn't get mixed up in there, who's buyer and who's seller. In other words, there was a spread to be taken advantage of, and I thought the case was about how the spread would be divided up between buyer and seller, and that's what ethics would require, and here in America, the law would probably require. And he laughed and said, in Greece, with a Greek stockbroker, they would just steal the whole thing for themselves. So they know more than us. And the question is going to be, are they going to use that knowledge for our benefit or for their own benefit? Okay, what can we do about this? Who should we trust? And this was the third chapter that I offered as a handout. And here's the best answer I can offer, and I hope it's a pretty good one. The practitioners you can trust, you can probably trust, are those in whose best interest, the practitioner's best interest, will be advanced if they behave in a trustworthy manner toward you. Those whose reputations will really and truly suffer if they buy the house for themselves, if they play, if they don't advance your interests. Those who, now I underline the word really in my notes because there's an easy shortcut there to try and let ourselves off the hook, and it won't work. We can say, well, any practitioner, their reputation would fall terribly if they didn't hold themselves up to these high standards that Professor Blum is waving his arms about. But it isn't really true. Most get away with taking advantage all the time because it's only in those situations where the reputational effect actually will disseminate itself widely and fully. And so the problem has to be very transparent so it can be seen, and then it has to be communicated easily to the community of people who the professional wants to keep good reputation with. This is not often the case, but it can be, and you can look for that. So number one, you're looking for practitioners whose reputations will truly suffer if they act badly, and you're letting them know in some subtle way that you're watching, and you will enhance their reputation if they live up to high standards, and perhaps sully it if they don't. You look to those practitioners whose behavior and words and actions show a real and true knowledge of the problems of conflicts of interest, problems of asymmetric information, and it shows their attempt to manage it, to try and tame it. If you're interviewing somebody and they say, oh, I don't have any conflicts of interest with you, then they haven't thought about it at all. Or they thought about it and they have every intention of not doing the right thing. But as I said earlier, conflict of interest in professional practice happens every day. It's frequent, it's common. And so a true professional is going to have given it a lot of thought and will have a thoughtful answer to you when you bring it up. Be careful of those who claim, well, I'm a fiduciary, so I have a duty to do this. You want to ask a lot more questions because there are a lot of people now, because of some law changes, the Dodd-Frank Act of 2009, there are a lot of people running around calling themselves fiduciary who couldn't even define it. As Professor Tamar Frankel of Boston University likes to say, we have understood fiduciary duty since Hammurabi's Code, which is a way of saying it's over 1,000 years old. And Congress passing some funky laws and redefining it doesn't do the trick. Fiduciary duty is what I've described before. It is the highest duty known to law, where the practitioner is upholding the interests and rights of the client and not ever crossing that line for themselves. So you can trust what I've called a true professional. The problem is you have to figure out who is willing to live up to those kind of standards. And that's chapter 17, where I talk a little bit about this idea of what is a true professional. Once again, my definition of a true professional is that practitioner who, when their interests diverge from the client's, they will follow the client's interests and only the client's interests. Give me one sec, Joe, and then I'm going to ask you if there are any. Oh, I'll ask you now. Are there any questions? You're muted, Joe. You're muted.
That's the term of 2021. You're muted. You're muted. Mm-hmm. So I think this question goes to what you had just talked about. The question is, it is commonly thought that if you receive payment for service, you are a professional. How does that square with your definition of a professional, and more importantly, the practical application of it?
Right. So my answer is short and to the point. The fact that you, according to my definition, the fact that you receive payment doesn't make you a professional in the least. So you want to find a different word for those people, because it doesn't make them a professional in the sense of the safeguarding and the high duties that we've been talking about today. And so you can do business with them. This is not an argument to avoid them completely. This is an argument Well, it kind of leads me to where I was going in a minute. The phrase caveat emptor is Latin for let the buyer beware. You find it all over our laws. For the most part, the buyer is responsible for not getting cheated. And if you're dealing with somebody who may call themselves a professional, but is not living up to these kind of very high standards, you have to be on the defensive. And that's what I've been trying to talk about here. Can I keep going, or other question?
There's one more question. It's how would you evaluate Vanguard's personal advisory services? I don't know if you're getting into individual ones, but
If I have time.
that's the only other question.
I have a feeling we're going to leave that to the end, and we'll see if I get to it, okay? Okay, so let me keep going. I know I have 10 more minutes, and I have more than 10 more minutes of material, so let's see how we do. So the true professionals I'm talking about are rare, and you must hunt them down. They're not just going to fall in your lap. You got to do some shopping, some digging for the right professional. And here are questions to ask yourself. Take that definition that I hope I lay out pretty well in chapter 17. And when evaluating a professional, say, do they act like it? Do they acknowledge the problems and difficulties, which we've talked about earlier in this talk? Problems of conflict of interest of all sorts, problems of asymmetric information. Have they built a reputation for that, for holding the client's interests as the only interest they are pursuing? By the way, I can stop right now and say, and certainly this is true of my own professional practice, the definition says they will always put the client's interest first and will only pursue the client's interest. There is one exception to that. The professional gets paid. However, you're looking for a professional who gets paid an amount that is fair, as judged by what other similar professionals get paid, and where the payment is crystal clear. You know exactly what you're paying. They are not making any money directly or indirectly in any other way whatsoever. And the only person they are beholden to because they are paid by is their client, their patient. That's it. Anything else is deeply troublesome. Okay, we're looking for high knowledge and skill in a professional, but that is not all. You're looking for one who consistently uses that knowledge and skill solely to address the interest and well-being of their clients, patients, customers, or I guess congregants. Now, I said if I had time, I'd do the financial services industry. It may or may not lead us to the question about Vanguard. So, as I said at the beginning, when I started out, I found myself both teaching at Wharton and also running a small financial services business, a financial advice business. And this caused me to start looking at the broader financial services industry. We could call it Wall Street if we want for short, but you know, it has an office on the corner down from your house. It caused me to start looking at it with a very professional eye, a teacher's eye, a professor's eye, and then later, as I looked deeper, with a very jaundiced eye. What I learned troubled me greatly, but it also led to a whole new field of study for me. The whole financial services, banking, money industry is fraught with troubles. It is laden with conflicts of interest, asymmetric information, untrustworthy players of all types, both corporate and individual, and untrustworthy. Some are untrustworthy by temperament. They're just not trustworthy people. But others are perfectly good people, wonderful people even, who have just fallen into a set of incentives that makes them untrustworthy. And it is full of folks claiming to be professionals who do not meet any realistic definition of that word. I will teasingly say to you, think about all the young people you know. Well, first of all, think about all the people you know who became doctors, lawyers, or clergy. How many of them went into it because they wanted to help people and do right by people? A significant percentage. Now think of all the people you know who went into money for a profession, and try to think of how many did it to serve others or do right by people. So, as I said a minute ago, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. You're the buyer. 5 minutes. Okay, but a real discussion of the financial services industry is a really rather long other lecture. It's a lecture I've given before and I sometimes give, and we could see about that. But it's not this lecture. It's not the lecture about professionalism, because my hope with this lecture is it went well beyond just the financial services industry. For now, I have a story for you. Maybe this story is supposed to be apocryphal and kind of sum up the financial services industry. And yet it's not about the financial services industry. All of you, most of you have gone out and bought a car. Maybe you bought a new car. And you've gone to the dealership and you've been greeted by a somewhat excessively aggressive young man or woman who says, you know, come and look at the car and sit in the car and absorb that wonderful smell. And later in the process says, what is it going to take for me to put you in a brand new car today? Well, imagine an alternative universe where you go to the car dealership and you're greeted by the young man or woman who says, and you say, show me a car. And you say, oh, no. We're not in the car selling business anymore. We're now in the car advisory business. Oh, so we want to be your car advisor. Come sit at my desk with me. We're going to ask you a whole lot of questions about yourself and your preferences and your likes, even your dreams. One of the financial services company had a dream book some years back. I think it probably fell by the wayside. So the car dealer, the car advisor asks you about all this, and he said, don't worry, it all gets analyzed by computer, and it's long and it's elaborate. And by the way, I'm going to just cheat and say this is a Toyota dealership, just for the sake of having a name. It doesn't matter which one. No, we're going to find you the perfect car for you. And you go through this long and elaborate, and they're going to do this for you. And oh, and by the way, they charge you for car advising. How much? Well, maybe 1% of the cost of the car for advising. And they bring you back. They have several meetings with you, and they bring you back. And now the computer has spit out this big, gigantic report, many pages about you and what car you should buy. And car advisor guy, he's all excited, and he says, I can't, please forgive me. We're going to go through this whole report together, piece by piece, and we're going to look at everything. But I can't resist. Let's peek at the end, the final conclusion. So he goes to the last page of the report, and he says, well, I'll be darned. Well, the computer says, and I have to agree, that the best car for you would be a Toyota. That's where I'm going to leave it. We have 1 minute for questions, but you don't want to buy a car that way. You don't want a car advisor who's also a car salesman, right? Good. Any other questions, Joe?
Steve, there's no other questions in the chat.
Okay. I guess I am left to answer the question about Vanguard's advisor services.
Personal advisory services.
Yes. God, I hate to answer this question. Here you go. What you really want, well, this whole lecture has been about what you really want, but I'm going to tell you something you don't want. You don't want a young person who doesn't know anything, who is reading off a computer screen. You do not want that. Would you take that for a doctor? Would you take that for a lawyer? Would you take that for a clergy? Would you dial up and say, okay, you know, what'd you go to school in? Marketing. When we hired 6 months ago, well, what about my relationship with the Almighty? Well, wait, let me look that up. That's my answer, best I can do. Okay, I guess that's it.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate, the full hour. I mean, it's just a wealth of information. The participants that haven't read the 4 chapters that Steve provided in the handout, I read them. I think it's just an add-on to this presentation.
Joe, I had one more thing I forgot that I wanted to say, which is I wanted to thank everybody for doing it. This is a little different because I've never ever in my life before taught where I can't see the people I'm teaching.
Yeah,
but you're out there. I want to thank you very much for doing this today, or listening to me, I guess. And my colleagues, I have 2 professional colleagues. There are 3 of us. And we are available for consultation if you think we can be of help to us. I'm sorry, of help to you. There's an interesting Freudian slip. If we can be of help to you, please feel free to contact us. Okay?
And they have your information in the.
I hope so. If not, you'll have to contact Joe or Katie and get it. Good. Thank you so much, everybody.
I'm going to just do a little exit here. Thank everyone for attending this webinar. We hope that you're able to attend the sessions later today and tomorrow with the financial symposium. Register link was in the reminder that you received before the presentation if you did sign up for other ones. All of the financial symposium presentations will be posted on our website, friendslifecare.org. And then once you leave this seminar today, there'll be a quick 5-question survey. We appreciate you filling that out and taking the time to give us a feedback on this. And also within 24 hours, you'll receive an email with a link to the webpage where this will be posted. And thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you on some or all of the additional seminars we have scheduled for the rest of the day and tomorrow. And I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you very much.